Senator, thank you so much for taking some time for us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Why did you want to come to Kentucky?
For a very simple reason. I happen to believe in democracy, and I happen to be a member of the United States Senate. And there are enormous challenges facing this country and the world. And I'm here in Kentucky because Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, happens to be the majority leader of the United States Senate. Now, McConnell can vote any way he wants on an issue. But what I find really outrageous and extremely undemocratic is his obstructionism and his refusal to allow major legislation to come to the floor for a debate and for a vote. So essentially, while enormous problems face this country, everybody knows it, there's very little that's going on in the Senate. It is a do-nothing body, and that is because of McConnell. And I came here to Kentucky to ask the people of this state to demand that their United States Senate allow real debate on the floor so that we can begin doing something to represent working families.
So he proudly calls himself the Grim Reaper because he kills any and all Democratic legislation that comes to the floor. He also recently wrote an op-ed saying that we should keep the filibuster in place. What's your view on the filibuster?
Well, let me talk about the Grim Reaper. I mean, and all that he is talking about is that we are seeing some decent legislation, not as strong as I would like, but some decent legislation coming from the House in terms of raising the minimum wage to a living wage. That would be have a profound impact on the state of Kentucky, which, as you know, is a poor state, a lot of low-wage workers in this state. And that you have a senator from Kentucky who is refusing to bring a bill passed in the House to the floor is really an insult to the working people of Kentucky. And that's true for gun safety legislation. It's true for legislation trying to protect the integrity of our elections from interference from Russia and other countries. In terms of the filibuster, I believe we need strong filibuster reform. I don't think that some staff member can send down a message, a note that says we're going to be required to have 60 votes. If you want to have a 60-vote margin, you want to filibuster, get on the floor and talk. I did it for 8.5 hours some years ago. That's what you can do. So I don't believe the Senate should be the House, but I do believe in strong filibuster reform, and also I think on major issues like Medicare for all, which I intend to get passed if elected president, we can do budget reconciliation and other provisions, other ways to get that through with a majority vote.
To me, I think this is one of the most important questions for you and for other presidential contenders. If Mitch McConnell is still in charge of the Senate, how do you get your agenda passed?
Well, I'll tell you how. You do what has historically always been done when real change takes place. And that is, you do what I've done today, except coming back as president, we could do it with a little bit more force. And that is, speak to the people, state by state, and have them understand what their senator is doing. In my view, the vast majority of the people in this state of Kentucky want to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. And if McConnell happens to be, and I hope he will not be, and I'll do everything I can to prevent that, but if he happens to be, to stay on as majority leader, I will be back in Kentucky to talk about the need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the need to guarantee health care to all people. And I think when you rally the American people, not just in Kentucky, all over this country, around an agenda that works for working people, you're going to be putting enormous pressure on those elected officials like McConnell, who consistently represent the wealthy and the powerful against the interests of the people in their own states.
So you've just released an ambitious climate change plan. Many people have said it's the most ambitious, the most far-reaching. What's your message to people in a state like this that have been dependent on coal for a long time?
My message is, as maybe the strongest pro-worker member of the United States Senate, somebody who has 100% a pro-union voting record after many years in the Congress, coal miners are not my enemy. People who work on oil rigs, people who work in the fossil fuel industry, these are working people. They're trying to put food on the table for their kids. They're not my enemy. But what we have to say is that the scientists are 100% clear. Climate change is an unprecedented threat to our country and to our planet. We must aggressively move away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. But the way our plan moves forward is not to leave these guys in the lurch and these women in the lurch. We put tens of billions of dollars into what we call a just transition, to say to them, we're not throwing you out on the street. We're going to guarantee you decent jobs. You're going to have health care. You're going to have educational opportunities. The fact that the product that you are working with is destroying the planet, that's not your fault. you're feeding your families. So we stand with you, and we will protect you as we make this fundamental transition in energy in America.
So there's a climate crisis unfolding right now with the Amazon rainforest burning at an unprecedented rate.
Yes.
If you were president today, how would you pressure President Bolsonaro to cut out those
I would use very
fires?
strong carrots and very strong sticks. I mean, as people have said, the rainforest in the Amazon is the lungs of the planet. They are absorbing carbon dioxide. They are producing oxygen. You destroy that, you impact not only the people of Brazil, but the people of the entire planet. And we as a planet, I mean, you have a president who literally thinks, shockingly, that climate change is a hoax. If I'm elected president, I will lead the world as the leader of the most powerful nation on earth, bring countries together to understand that this is not an American issue, it's not a Brazilian issue, it's not a German issue or a Russian issue. We have got to go forward as a planet to transform our energy system. We are in it together. We are tied together. And we have got to transform our energy system. And I think when we do that, by the way, we can create many millions of jobs, not only in this country, but throughout the world. But what's going on in Brazil right now...
Would you consider sanctions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is going on in Brazil is extremely dangerous. And I think, as many people know, the new president over there is a Trump acolyte. I mean, this is somebody who looks at the world the way Trump does, and that is very, very frightening. So I think we would use all of the tools at our disposal, the carrots and the sticks, the punishments and the inducements, to try to make sure that we stop the burning of the Amazon. And in fact, we work with the entire world to move forward to protect the planet.
So at the same time, the DNC has just blocked a resolution to have a debate that's solely focused on the climate crisis. Why do you think they don't want to go forward with that?
Ask Tom Perez. I don't know the answer. I mean, what I think is that I'm not a great fan of the structure of the debates as they now exist. The truth is, if I asked you a question about the healthcare crisis or about the economy, and you got 45 seconds to respond, you can't do it. And you're insulting the people of this country if anyone thinks that you can. So we need serious discussion about serious issues. And I think probably what would be better in general than the current format that we have, where we spend a few minutes on healthcare and a few minutes on the environment and a few minutes on education, is rather to devote a couple of hours to go into depth on climate, on healthcare. What do we do about the educational crisis in America? What do we do about the high cost of prescription drugs? What do we do about infrastructure? We need serious discussion, and that goes beyond 1-minute sound bites.
So Congressman Tim Ryan has invited you and the other presidential contenders to a debate on the climate crisis in Youngstown. That would be, of course, in defiance of the DNC's rules. Will you accept his invitation?
Well, this is the first I heard about it. Let me
think it over. You mentioned Bolsonaro and how he's a Trump acolyte, and we see the rise of these far-right figures. There, Israel, you've made the comparison, a lot of sort of far-right authoritarian leaders around the world. Why do you think that we're seeing that right now?
I'll tell you why I think so. I'm not 100% sure. But this is what I think. I think you got a global economy which has undergone a major transformation over the last many, many decades. All over the world, you're seeing rural communities, agricultural communities in trouble, family farmers going out of business in the United States, in Vermont, all over the world. You're seeing people moving to cities. You're seeing gaps, significant gaps in educational levels, gaps in the utilization of technology. So I think what you're seeing in America, in rural America, where actually life expectancy is going down, there's a lot of people have been left behind. They're going, the jobs they have don't pay them a living wage. They're worried that their kids can't get an education, can't afford health care. Many of people in rural America are turning to drugs, to alcohol, to suicide even. So I think you got a whole lot of people who are falling behind, and you have political leaders who have ignored that pain and that reality. The fact that people are working for low wages, they are spending half of their income in housing, they don't have any health care, they don't have any educational opportunities. And a lot of people around this country, and this is why I think Trump won, is people look at the Democratic establishment and they're saying, hey, I'm here. Do you know that I'm making $10 an hour and I can't make it? Do you know that I'm paying a whole lot for rent that I can't afford childcare? Anybody worried about me? Anybody care about me? Anybody know that I exist? And I think for a lot of those folks, Trump comes along. I don't think people like Trump. I don't think they believe him, but he was different. So I think, and that's true to a large degree around the world, a whole lot of people feel left behind. Rich are getting richer. We have massive, not only in this country, we have massive income and wealth inequality, worse than any time since the 1920s. That's true all over the world. So a lot of people are left behind, and they're looking, unfortunately, to authoritarian leaders who they believe can right the wrongs that they are suffering.
There's a clip that's been passed around of you in 2003 talking about the threat of China to American workers and predicting that if we normalize trade relations with China, it'd be devastating to American workers. And you actually predicted at the time that normalizing trade relations with China would be the end of the two-party system. Of course, we have now you as a top candidate as an outsider, and Donald Trump, who ran as an outsider and basically took over the Republican Party. What is your view of China today? Do you believe China represents an existential threat to the American worker?
No, I wouldn't use the word existential threat. I think China is a country that is moving, unfortunately, in a more authoritarian way in a number of directions. We would have hoped that they would move toward a more democratic form of government, and moving in the opposite direction. And they are a country that vigorously protects their own interests. But what we have to say about China, in fairness to China and its leadership, is, if I'm not mistaken, they have made more progress in addressing extreme poverty than any country in the history of civilization. Okay, so they've done a lot of things for their people. Their economy now is struggling, but I think it is absolutely possible for us to have a positive working relationship with China. What I said back then and what I believed is that the function of permanent normal trade relations with China was pretty obvious to me. It is a legislation, trade agreement written by large, profitable corporations who wanted cheap labor in China. So what they wanted, it was a trade agreement which made it easier for them to shut down in this country and then hire people in China back then for 50 cents an hour, $1 an hour. Wages have gone up there a bit, but clearly much lower wages than in the United States. That was what that trade agreement was about, and it has cost us many millions of jobs, as has NAFTA. So what I said then and what I say now is trade is extremely important, but you cannot have unfettered free trade written by large corporations and their CEOs. You need trade agreements that are designed to work for working families, for family-based agriculture, not just for the owners of profitable corporations.
If you were president right now, what would you do vis-a-vis Hong Kong and protecting the protesters and what's going on there?
I think you've got to make a very strong statement that we in the United States, this is certainly not the case with Donald Trump, but historically at least, and under a Bernie Sanders presidency, we stand for democracy and we stand for human rights, and we will do everything that we can to prevent oppressive governments from forcefully denying people their democratic rights.
One of the ways that the global economy is changing is through the threat of automation.
Yes.
And one of your fellow candidates, Andrew Yang, has made this a centerpiece of his campaign. Some economists estimate that up to 50% of American jobs could be lost by automation. How would a Sanders administration deal with that?
There are people who disagree about the extent to which robotics and artificial intelligence will transform the economy. But there is no question that it will have a profound impact. I don't think anyone knows exactly what the impact is. And let me start off by saying, this is an issue that is of enormous consequence for working people, but it is an issue that has gotten nowhere near the kind of discussion that it needs. Now, not only in terms of the potential of job loss, for example, driverless trucks and cars will have a profound impact on all kinds of jobs in the trucking industry and taxi cabs, et cetera, but the whole impact of robotics in factories, the impact of artificial intelligence in terms of invading our privacy rights. Privacy is becoming a word that we almost don't use anymore, because I think among the younger generation, there's a full understanding that almost everything they do and everything they have done, somebody knows about. And we have not had the kind of legislation or even debate about how we protect privacy from the invasion of modern computer technology. But to answer your question, bottom line for me is that technology and robotics and artificial intelligence are not unto themselves bad things if they work to benefit ordinary people. If all that they do is make the rich richer and CEOs even wealthier, if they cost us jobs and drive up corporate profits, that is not acceptable. So the challenge that we face is how do we use technology to improve the lives of working people? So if you have a terrible job, a boring job, and we make your job better and we enable you to work 20 hours a week rather than 40 hours a week, is that a bad thing? It is not a bad thing. But it means to say you still need to earn income to live by. We can't cut your salaries in half.
Right.
Now, one of the areas that we are working with, we take a very, a different approach than Mr. Yang, and that is, I believe, in a jobs guarantee. There are an enormous amount of work. There is an enormous amount of work that has to be done, all the way from childcare to healthcare, to education, to rebuilding our infrastructure, to combating climate change, to dealing with our growing elderly population. Enormous number of jobs out there. And I believe under a Sanders administration, what we would do is create those jobs, and as people lose their jobs, there will be other jobs available. But bottom line is, we cannot allow robotics, technology, artificial intelligence to simply throw people out on the street. Technology has got to benefit all of us, not just the heads of large corporations.
Why is a federal jobs guarantee better than a universal basic income?
I will tell you why. A simple reason. I think most people want to work. They want to be a productive member of society. I think it's a very deeply ingrained feeling that people have. They don't want to sit on the side. Yes, of course, getting a guaranteed income is better than having nothing and sleeping out on the street, that's for sure. But I think people want to be part of our humanity, to be truthful, and how we feel good about ourselves is when we are productive members of our society. We're contributing something. And I think people feel that very strongly. And I think there is more than enough work to be done in so many areas. And our job is to say, if you are able to work, we have a job for you. Because the truth is, we have so much work to do to rebuild this country in so many ways.
I got to speak with Jeff Weaver, who has known you for a long time. Last week I had an interview with him, and he said even 30 years ago, you've always been very driven, very passionate. Where does that fire come from?
I have to say, I mean, I'm not a psychoanalyst. I haven't psychoanalyzed myself. And it's hard for anybody to know what motivates them, to be honest with you. I think, frankly, though, a lot of it comes from growing up in a family that did not have a lot of money. And understanding what it means, to have a family that struggled economically and what that meant to our family, and to know that many other families were then and are now in the same boat. And that's something that is very, very deep inside of me.
Yeah. I know you also, lost your mother at a young age.
Yeah, I did.
How did that impact your family?
Well, I lost my mom when I was 18. I lost my dad a couple of years later. So I was kind of out there on my own.
Yeah. Has that influenced your view on Medicare for All? Is that part of why that's such a central piece?
Well, I happen to think, not just for me or my family, but that it is barbaric that today we lose 30,000 people a year. We don't talk about it, and this is part of what corporate media is about, and it's part of the power of the healthcare industry. A lot of people are hurting because of a dysfunctional healthcare system. And to me, I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. And somehow in Canada, they managed to have a system where everybody goes to the doctor you want, any doctor you want. You don't take out your wallet, no out-of-pocket expenses, no premiums, no co-payments, no deductibles, no nothing. You get sick, you end up in the hospital, you come out, there is no bill, people don't go bankrupt. So I sit there and I think, how come the Canadians can do it and spend half as much per person as we do on healthcare? Pay a fraction of what we pay for prescription drugs. And then I got angry at the greed of the healthcare industry that made $100 billion last year, while 87 million people are uninsured or underinsured. So I do believe that healthcare is a human right, and it pains me, because I see people, I go all over my own state, all over this country, and you see so many people hurting, and occasionally dying from the dysfunctionality of the current system.
I don't know if you've seen this reporting yet, but The Intercept has a new report up about how Kamala Harris, who was an early co-sponsor of your Medicare for All bill, was running Facebook ads, building her campaign list off of her support for that bill, and now she says that she's not comfortable with it. Why do you think that Senator Harris and others are backing away from the specific version of Medicare for All?
Probably better to ask Senator Harris, but I think at the end of the day, what this debate is about really has nothing to do with healthcare, honestly. The system is so dysfunctional. We're spending twice as much per capita as any other industrialized nation. So many uninsured, so many underinsured, such high costs for prescription drugs. What it is all about, and this is what the corruption of American politics and society is about. There's only one thing that this debate is about. Do we have the courage and the capability of taking on the healthcare industry that made $100 billion in profits last year, that over the last 20 or 30 years has spent billions of dollars on campaign contributions and on lobbying? That's what it's about. They have enormous wealth, enormous power. They have a lot of friends in the media. Do we have the strength to take them on and create a system that is humane and that works for all people? Not everybody is prepared to do that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you another healthcare-related issue. We're in the midst of the worst addiction crisis right now, perhaps in our nation's history.
And we're sitting in Kentucky here where it is a very serious
Ground zero, absolutely. Talk about your approach to the war on drugs. Your campaign's just released a comprehensive criminal justice reform. Some places like Seattle are piloting a program where they would decriminalize even hard drugs like heroin and are routing people instead of to prison to rehab. Is that something that you're interested in?
That's movement in the right direction. Look, this is what we have to recognize. First of all, we have to ask the question, why is it that so many people are falling into drugs, into alcohol, and into despair? I mean, that's an issue over here. Why do people turn to drugs to ease?
And why do you think so?
Because I think there's a lot of pain in this country, and I think people are running away from that pain. And I think in rural parts of this country, if you have a job that pays you $9 an hour, if your kid can't afford to go to college, if you're living in a community which is depopulating, where there's not a whole lot of hope, not a whole lot of optimism, you get into a mindset which says the best that I can do is ease my pain. And then I become addicted to one thing or another. But that is an issue. I mean, the doctors call it diseases of despair. That's what it's called. I did a hearing as chairman of a subcommittee a few years ago called, poverty as a death sentence. Poverty as a death sentence. There is a physiology of poverty. Did you know that? In other words, if you are living in poverty and you can't afford to pay your bills and you can't afford to go to healthcare, you develop a physical structure that deals with all of the stress that you have to deal with. And that's why we have massive gaps in life expectancy between wealthy communities and poor communities. Gaps of 15 to 20 years, because people living in poverty are living in terrible, terrible stress. So first thing that we have to do is give hope to people who in many cases have lost hope. And that means give them the educational opportunities they and their kids need, give them decent housing, give them health care, give them jobs that will allow them to be productive members of society and earn a decent income. I think when people have jobs and income, there is much less likelihood that they will turn to drugs and addiction. Second of all, of course, addiction is a really tough disease, but it has to be treated as a disease. It is insane that right now, the place where most addicts are not in clinics, not in hospitals, but are in jail. And that is insane. That really is insane. So the first thing we have to do is understand that addiction is a disease and has to be treated in a medical sense. And we certainly are not doing anywhere near, some states like Vermont are doing better than other states, but we're not doing anywhere near what we should be doing. But I agree with those folks who are moving in the direction of decriminalizing at least marijuana right now.
What about hard drugs, though? I mean, that's the Portugal model.
I'm not there yet. I mean,
Why not?
Because heroin is a killer. You want to push heroin, sorry, I'm not too tolerant to that.
Not dealers, though, people who are addicted and using.
Well, addiction is, we have to treat addiction. No, that's what I just said.
Yeah. No secret that you've been critical of the Democratic establishment.
Have I?
If you do become the nominee, do you believe that they'll support you?
Well, I don't want to speculate. I certainly understand that not everybody in the Democratic establishment, I think the third way folks referred to me as an existential threat to the Democratic Party. I think that was the term that they used. So,
Are you?
in some ways I am. And that is that I want to transform the Democratic Party. We're sitting right now in Kentucky, right? This is a very poor state. This is a state which has a whole lot of folks who are working for low wages. You have a senator who wants to do away with the Affordable Care Act that would throw tens and tens of thousands of people in this state off the health care they have. They have an educational crisis. And yet you got two right-wing Republican senators. Most of the members in the House are Republican. Why is that? Why is that? And I think it's because the Democratic Party has lost the vision that it once had under FDR, even maybe under Harry Truman, about being the party of the working class of this country, being the party that says to the billionaire class, you know what? You can't have it all. You're all going to pay your fair share of taxes. You're not going to throw American workers out on the street. You know what, drug companies? You're not going to charge us the highest prices in the world. We're going to lower drug prices in this country. You know what? We're going to join every other major nation and have a Medicare for all single-payer program. But I think when you lose the willingness to confront the corporate elite that controls so much of our economic and political life, people understand what's going on. And you go to them in election day, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. They don't believe you. They don't believe you. And then you have Republicans coming along with their agenda of trying to divide us up, getting us to hate each other if we're black or gay or Latino or immigrant. That's usual demagogic type activity. And when people have no hope and don't believe that one party is going to stand for them, they'll fall for that stuff. So I guess in the sense that I believe in transforming the Democratic Party to, in fact, be a party of the working class of this country, to be a party of young people, and I think we are making some progress in getting young people into the Democratic Party. But it amazes me. You go to some states and they are really excited to see new people. And other states say, oh my God, who are those people? How dare them? Don't they understand this is our place? They're not welcome in here. And that's the message that goes out.
Yeah.
And that has to change.
Well, on that note, the DSCC has endorsed a couple of moderate candidates in competitive Senate primaries. They just endorsed John Hickenlooper as an example. Is that the right move?
No. No, I think you let it play out. I think, there is a mythology. I mean, this is obviously a major debate within the Democratic Party. Those who think that so-called centrist candidates, backed by folks who have a whole lot of money, who may be able to win over some moderate Republicans, that is the future. I disagree. I think the future of the Democratic Party is to greatly expand the base, increase the voter turnout, especially with young people, speak to the needs of working people. I believe there are some people who voted for Trump who, in fact, if given an option for a progressive agenda, will vote with us to grow the number of African Americans and Latino and Native Americans, get them more involved in the political process. That's the way you win. That's my view.
All right, one last quick question for you. I know you don't like to criticize your opponents, so I'm going to ask you the opposite question. Who else on the stage with you, who else is running for president right now, do you admire?
Well, on a personal level, I'm not going to give you the answer you want. What do you think about that? Look, it ain't easy running for president.
Yeah.
And I know not all of the candidates well. Obviously, I know the senators well, and I like them all. So if you want me to say, do I admire them? I do. I've known Elizabeth Warren for over 20 years. I've known Amy Klobuchar for a long time. So these are, people who I consider to be friends, and we will see what happens as the campaign progresses.
Senator, thank you so much. Really grateful for the time.
Thank you, Krystal.